let's take a couple questions from the audience. Please use your chat feature. One of the things I have while those questions are coming in, Eddie, is you talked a little bit about compliance, right? And you talked a little bit about components, and so as you sum that up a little bit there towards the end, what are the crucial components to validate an organization's cyber audit and demonstrate that competence to regulators?
What most people overlook is getting a, let's say, attorney-client privilege wrapped around their cybersecurity audits. That's the thing that I think most people forget. Because you can go to so many of the different frameworks and follow them, and that's great. But to have a healthy conversation with auditors, you need to feel safe. And people they pass that responsibility around. Ask the CISO. Oh, it's not the CISO, it's upstairs. Oh, it's not upstairs, right? And I think, when you come in and have your cybersecurity stack evaluated by a cybersecurity legal expert, and then have all of that wrapped in attorney-client privilege, when regulators come, it's kind of talk to the lawyer, right? I'm fine here. I'm just doing my thing. I'm fixing the gaps, because there are always going to be gaps.
Yeah. So, I think that brings up another good point, though, right? Like attorney-client privilege. I can attest to seen that more often than not, especially in the last few years, that more organizations are adopting that process. But let's suppose that the organization is aware of gaps, right? And those gaps could have a material impact. How do we communicate those issues to regulators effectively, right? And there's a balance here, right? Effectively communicating an issue while maintaining the confidentiality of your tech stack, or not essentially letting out a vulnerability.
Yeah, well, I think that we can be a little bit more open when we feel protected with regulators. And so being forthcoming with in a confidential dialogue with them is fairly safe once we've got all those I's dotted and T's crossed legally, right? Because then they are also legally bound. And so, if there are material gaps, as long as they are declared but not necessarily spoken of, right? As long as they're declared in a memo, in a document, as long as it's been written down, signed off by the executive, by leadership, to say, yeah, these are the gaps that we're aware of right now. Doesn't necessarily have to be volunteered to regulators unless they ask, because you can close those gaps in that amount of time, right? But as long as they've been declared in writing and signed off, then I don't think you have to do anything else at that point.
Got it. It's a slow question day from the from the audience. So either that or my chat isn't refreshing. So in the last 2 minutes, any burning questions from the folks out in the live stream?
Well, I'm also very curious as they come in. I'm very curious to understand, what the private sector, not the public sector, is experiencing with this, because I talk a lot about supply chain. I mentioned that Belgian company. Is the private sector experiencing the same pressure as enterprise public companies? When it comes to all of this.
From my perspective, I think it's a derivative pressure, right? Like we all work together, and so what impacts public companies at some point impacts private sector as well. And I've seen a lot of discussion around those derivative impacts, because we all do business together, right? And so just because we're upstream or downstream from a supply chain standpoint and having to fulfill that due diligence across the chain, I think that's an issue. And one more, what happens when you miss your remediation target date?
Yeah, from a regulatory standpoint, I don't know the answer to that. Right. Yeah. So this is where relationship with regulators would be helpful. This is why you don't want to shy away from them, right? Once you feel legally safe, I think enter that dialogue with regulators. They're all human too. Yeah. But I don't truly know the answer to that. What would actually happen? Yeah. But you'd be surprised that most people are not compliant, right? So it's like, okay, well, let's have the conversation. Let's be grown-ups about it, since that being the case. And I think the real vulnerability is in kind of those private, 10,000 and below seats kind of companies, which might not have a CISO designated to the role full time. If I'm a threat actor, that's my target market, and those are the people I'm interested in talking to. Yeah.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And so, Eddie, with that, thank you so much for joining us today.